So this morning, we are going to carry on our topic of preparing the land. We've been in this time of preparation. We've looked at preparing hearts, preparing hands, and then Trev introduced us last week to preparing the land, and he was talking about John the Baptist, and John the Baptist being a preparer of the way. And there's very much a sense in which we are all preparers of the way. So this week, we're going to start at the very beginning with some public reading of Scripture. I put the numbers into the little planning sheet wrong, and it looked like we were going to read Genesis chapters 1 to 19. We're not. We're just going to read Genesis 1 to 19, skip a bit, and then carry on. But yeah, we're going to start at Genesis 1. What a great place to start. The closer you can get to the beginning of the Bible, apparently, the better your message is. I don't believe that's true. But let's see. So bear with me. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning the first day. And God said, "Let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water." So God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it, and it was so. God called the vault sky. And there was evening and there was morning the second day. And God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear." And it was so. God called the dry ground land, and gathered the water, and the gathered waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it, according to their various kinds." And it was so. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seeds according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seed in it according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the third day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times and days and years. And let them be lights in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth." And it was so. God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set them in the vault of the sky to give light on earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the fourth day. And then God did lots of other things to do with nature. But I'm not going to talk about nature today. I do appreciate it. But we're going to skip down to verse 27. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground." Then God said, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth and all the birds in the sky and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food." And it was so. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning the sixth day. Oh, God was busy. He did a lot of things. And I was driving along in my car one day, and this verse was read, Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And it just says, "Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters." And this thought came into my head. Oh, it wasn't ready for us then. We couldn't have survived in that atmosphere. We couldn't have thrived in that place. There were so many more things that God needed to do. And in order for us to move in order for us to walk with God in the garden like Adam and Eve did, in order for us to commune with God and relate to God, there were a number of things that he had to do in order to get the land ready to host us. And as I was thinking about that, I looked at the different things that God did and thought, do you know what? We can do the same thing. We can prepare the land for others. We can make it ready so that others can come and encounter God. So we're going to look at a few of the things that God did in order to get the land ready. And hopefully it will inspire us that we can do these things for other people as well. So we're going to start at verse 3. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning the first day. Light. God created light. It's crucial for life, isn't it, that we have light? But you remember a word came this morning about being in a dark tunnel. And if you're in a dark tunnel and suddenly you come out into the light, it can be quite terrifying. You can't see properly. It's very exposing. There's nowhere to hide. And if you can't interpret the light as it's supposed to be interpreted, then the light can seem like a scary place to be. But in John 8, Jesus says this, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." And what we bring to people is the light of life. And it can seem exposing and it can seem scary, but the light is a place where there are no more shadows. You know, if you've lived in the shadows, if you've lived in the darkness, you're never quite sure what's real and what's not real. You're never quite sure what's a threat and what's safe. There are things that people kept hidden and they don't want to bring them out into the light. But bringing things into the light is not for shame. It's not for exposure. It's because in the light, they're so much smaller. In the light, they can be contained, they can be looked at, they can be cleansed. You know, it's a cleansing light. And when we bring somebody into that atmosphere of light, there is no shame. There is no having to put on a mask. There is no having to pretend that we're something that we're not. There is no having to kind of think, I must be like this because that's how I'm supposed to be. There's you and I, and there's reality, and there's life, and there's mess, and there's dirt sometimes. But if we bring people into that light is the light of life. It's the light of Jesus. And it's a great place to bring people to. Secondly, space. And God said, "Let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water." So God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it. And it was so. God called the vault sky. And there was evening and there was morning the second day. And in my imagination, I just see this, suddenly there's this space that just comes like this, and there's the sky, and there's like that, just that space to move around, to be free. Before that, I imagine it's all kind of like this. You know, it's all squashed together, isn't it? And suddenly God says, "Let there be a vault." And there it was, a glorious space. And space created order. We need space. Space to grow, space to think, space to be quiet, space to be. And there are many spaces that we invite other people into. Social spaces where we encounter one another. Quiet spaces for people to think. Prayer spaces, study spaces, and sacred spaces like this. You know, we do this together. We make this happen. This space that we have created here starts off in a very practical way. It starts off with somebody unlocking the door and somebody putting out the chairs. It starts with somebody switching on some microphones and a desk at the back. It starts with somebody brewing some coffee. But it becomes this sacred space where we encounter God and we are marked touched by him every time we come into this space. And we invite other people to come into these spaces. At the end of Mark 5:35, there's a story where Jesus raises a little girl from the dead. It's Jairus' daughter. She's 12 years old. And Jairus invites Jesus to come and pray for her because she is gravely ill. But before he gets there, she dies. And Jesus turns to Jairus and he just says, "Don't worry, just believe." And when they get to the house, it's chaos. There are people wailing and weeping, probably gnashing their teeth, because those things go together, don't they? And the house is full of people, probably entirely appropriate for the culture, that this is what they did. The little girl had died and everybody is in there and they're crying. They've probably brought the casseroles round, and people are weeping. And Jesus creates a space for faith. So he clears the house. He clears everybody out, probably in a very gracious way. Because these people, their faith doesn't go any further than the fact that this child has died. And they accept that that is what's happened. And Jesus takes 3 disciples and the parents into this house. And he creates a space where he can speak to this little girl. And she is raised from the dead. An incredible space that he makes, that he creates for them, that he creates for this family, that he creates for this little girl. We have the ability to create those spaces. We have the ability to create spaces of faith, spaces of hope, spaces of expectation. That space may look like this. It may look like a coffee shop. It may look like inviting somebody to walk your dog with you. You don't have to have a dog to walk, but apparently it seems to help. There's all sorts of spaces that we can hold and create for people to come into. The world seems so crowded, doesn't it? It's crowded with people. It's crowded with stuff. It's crowded with distractions. It's crowded with phones. But actually, we can help people to come into those spaces and we can help them to create their own spaces. Boundaries. It's kind of one of those things, isn't it? Your heart sinks a bit when you think of a boundary, but then maybe you think, oh, actually, maybe it is a good thing. But God creates boundaries. In verse 9, he says, "Let the water under the sky be gathered to one place and let dry ground appear." And it was so. God called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters he called seas, and God saw that it was good. Boundaries keep us safe. They give us a foundation. They keep us focused. They bring freedom. And in this case, the boundary was so important because it sets people on solid ground. If you don't know where the boundaries are, you don't know whether you're in the sea or whether you're on the land. Are you drowning or are you safe? Sometimes people don't know. Are they drowning or are they safe? They've lost themselves. They don't know where they are. But when you help people to set boundaries, it brings a security, but it brings a freedom as well. It helps us to separate things like truth from lies. What's real, what's not real. Jesus was at great at setting boundaries. Jesus sent out the 12 in Matthew 10. And he says in this verse, "As you enter the home, give it your greeting. If the home is deserving, let your peace rest on it. If it's not, let your peace return to you. If anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, leave that home or town. Shake off the dust of your feet." It's a wonderful boundary because it kept the disciples safe, but it also enabled them to sow and to give of themselves. And they knew when to push forward, when to pull back, when to give their time, when to walk away. It's a really important boundary for us because sometimes people aren't ready to receive what you have to say. People aren't ready to come into this space. Timing is everything. Listening to the Holy Spirit is everything. So boundaries are really important for us, and they're really important in helping other people. So many of the boundaries today are blurred. Work and social life, office and work. Are we working from home, or are we working from the office? Are we at home ill, but we can kind of pick up our emails and do a little bit? Are we on holiday but contactable? Is this TV program, is that a documentary or is it a fake? Is it real? Is some of it set up? I hate those documentaries. I love documentaries. I hate those programs where you kind of think it's real, but then you discover that actually some of it was staged. I think things like Made in Chelsea, I can't say I've ever watched it, but I know that it's supposed to look like it's real, but actually they've got some actors and they've probably run that scene about 4 times. But it's supposed to be fly on the wall, and it's not. I really don't like things where you're not quite sure if it's real and you're not quite sure if it's fake. Weekdays and weekends, something happened to those, didn't they? We used to have 5 days a week and then a weekend and then a Sunday where not an awful lot happened. Have you ever been shopping on a Sunday? It is rammed. I mean, it used to be a Saturday morning, didn't it? But Sundays, man, they're busy in the shops. Everything's got a little bit blurred. Being available. There was a time, wasn't there, when you went out of your house and that was it, you were out and you were unavailable because my phone was on the telephone table in the hall. Those days are long gone, aren't they? We are permanently available, and that is exhausting. And we have to show people those boundaries, that it's okay to hit the off button. And I can't go into this today, but one of the things we need to show them as a boundary is a culture of Sabbath. Sabbath is incredible. Sabbath is a sacred boundary. And Sabbath is what keeps us sane and healthy and whole. We'll look at that at another time. But it's a boundary, and it's a really important one we need to show people. Next, food. Yes. Love food. Verse 11, God said, let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it according to their various kinds, and it was so. Verse 29, then God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. These will be yours for food. God was so practical, wasn't he? He really knew how to feed us. And feeding people is so important, be it physically or spiritually. You know, there are 2 tables. There is the dining table and there is the communion table. And they are both really important because both of them are about relationship. You know, you get somebody round your table and that's when the conversation starts. Our place of communing with God, hence the word communion, is at the communion table. You can't just wander into that. It's like, this is his body, this is his blood. We don't come to that casually. It's a point of encounter, but it's a point of being fed. And if I asked you now to think about, just cast your mind back to things that have happened in your life, I'm pretty sure some of you would have memories of food, a memorable meal or a memorable occasion when you were around somebody's table, because it creates a lasting impression. I've got a number of memories, of sitting on the bedroom floor of a student's house. I wasn't a student, they were. Eating pasta, of course. Of sitting in an asylum seeker's house and eating some of the best food I've ever eaten. Of eating food on a mission trip in Cuba, probably in a building that didn't have any windows or doors, but the food was delicious. Many of the most memorable meals I've had are with people that didn't have a lot, and they were generous to me. And I will always appreciate that. I also remember a time when I didn't have much money, and this was 40 odd years ago. I was a student, and one of our student friends had a party at her house. She lived in Fixby. If you know Huddersfield, that should say everything to you. She lived in Fixby. The potato salad was the most delicious thing I'd ever eaten. And then at the end, because I'd been brought up well, I offered to do the washing up. Oh, could we go and help with the washing up? To which my future husband kind of nudged me in the ribs and went, I don't think it's that sort of party. I think they've got caterers in. And I'm like, oh, okay. I've never been to anywhere where they got caterers in. But do you know what? I remember that food. I remember that time. I remember that hospitality. And people will remember when we feed them. And feeding people is a platform of opportunity. In John 21, Jesus makes breakfast for the disciples, and then he restores Peter. We haven't got time to look at that today, but I love the idea that Jesus knew how to cook, and he gave them bread and he gave them fish. And then he turns to Peter and he says, "Do you love me? Feed my sheep." And Jesus, who has fallen from grace, again, the story's not for today, has fallen from grace, is restored in a wonderful, wonderful way. Food, both the communion table and the dining table, are a place of opportunity, a place of relationship, a place of restoration. And then God makes time. I mean, what a reputation. He literally made time. I don't mean he just, carved up time in his day. He literally made time. In verse 16, it says, God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set them in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good, and there was evening and there was morning, the fourth day. He literally made time. That is incredible. And it's never stopped since, apart from possibly one notable exception, which you can find in your Bibles as your homework if you want. But when God made time, he made it possible for us to live and to interpret the universe. Can you imagine what it would be like without time? I just can't get my head around what that would look like. He gave us routine, structure, repetition. Those are all things that we need to live well. And we can introduce other people to that. But we can make time for them. Jesus made time for people. He would change his plans. In the story we looked at earlier on about Jairus, while Jesus is on his way to heal Jairus' daughter, a woman touches the hem of his garment. He stops her. What's that all about? Somebody's just touched me. He heals her. Then he carries on along his way. But he stops and does things. Zacchaeus, tax collector, very undesirable man, very, very sort of low in the social order of things, if you like. Jesus calls him out of a tree. Zacchaeus, come on, we're off to your house for dinner tonight. I'll probably stay over, so make sure that you bring me a sleeping bag. He makes time. I don't know what else he was going to do, but then suddenly he's like, oh, there's Zacchaeus. Right, we'll go to his house tonight. Can you imagine if Jesus just, I'm coming to your house tonight. Let's go. We'll have a meal together. Incredible. He changed his plans. He made time. He made that space for people. And when I make time, I'm usually enriched by the time I spend with other people. Time seems to be the one thing that nobody has these days. And it's important that we see time in an entirely different way to the world, that we're not conformed to the pattern of the world, that time is something that we make, time is something that we give away to others. And finally, God made an environment that we can thrive in. And we create an environment that other people can thrive in. In verse 28, it says, God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground. God created a place where humankind could thrive, could multiply, could live really well. And we are made in God's image. And one of our jobs is to reflect his image and to show other people what they look like and who they look like. To speak words of life to them and to introduce them to the one who gives life. In John 10:10, Jesus says, I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. No half measures here. We don't introduce people to some sort of religious order. We don't introduce them to rules and regulations. We don't introduce them to all the things they cannot do. We introduce them to life and life in abundance. We prepare the land for people. We care for it. We cultivate it. We make it a wonderful place for people to come into. And what we're really doing is preparing the land to make disciples. That's what we're going for. Whether people have visited us, whether they're a member of one of the branch groups, whether they're our family or our neighbours, whether they're fully, like we are, fully immersed in church life. We create spaces where we thrive. You know, I'm thinking about two things that we've done together lately. One was the away day. What an amazing time. For those of you that came, thank you for coming. It was a time of life. It was a time of thriving. We did some very practical things, like clearing up at the end, setting up at the beginning. We encountered God together. We worshipped together. We ate together. Some people did crafts. Some people were reading a book. The kids were kicking a football around on the field. Some were going for a walk. Trev was in goal. I don't know how that happened, but he actually took a dive for the ball, which was incredible. But it was full. It was a place where we thrived. I remember at the end of the day looking around and thinking, everybody is completely exhausted. I don't know how we got up for church the next day, but it was one of those exhaustions that was, we've lived. We've really lived today. And the second one was when we celebrated Jen's life this week. Man, did we have to pull out all the stops. It was standing room only. And then people were staying for food afterwards. But we had people like getting tables, getting chairs, standing up and letting other people sit down, making drinks. We were having to think on our feet. And it was truly a celebration of life. And it felt so good. We had to do it together. We couldn't have done it any other way. It was an amazing time. We were celebrating somebody's life, but we were full of life. And when God finished creating the heavens and the earth, he was really pleased with what he'd done. In Genesis 2, he creates a lovely garden and everything is set. He puts the man and the woman there. And he did it so that he could host us, the culmination of his creation. And in John 14, Jesus is talking to his disciples and he says this in verse 3. This is amazing. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. Jesus was talking about being at the right hand of the Father. And he said, I will take you with me. We prepare the land so that people can have an encounter with God. The greatest privilege is to create something and take others with us. We prepare the land. We make a way that allows others to be where we are going, where we are, and we take them with us, just as Jesus did.